For today's video, we'll continue the series which we started on C# for programmers, C# programming for beginners, or how to write code inside of Unity. And for today, I'm going to talk about how to reference inside of Unity. And I think the easiest example I can give you right now is, imagine if you were a car dealer and you bought two cars, right? Maybe a red and a blue. And then a client comes by and says, hey, he wants the blue car. You can just show him the car since you already own it, but then you decide to order it from the company entirely so it can make a new car for you, which doesn't make sense really. So it's transformed this logic or this concept into game development. Now, if you have a game object, let's say your player, definitely you need to reference it so that you can maybe get the life or get his health or something like, or the energy or whatever it is you are trying to code. But then you cannot access that. If you can't access that, it means you have to create a new component and then start using that entirely, which doesn't even make sense at all. So rather than for you to keep on instantiating new components into the game, all you have to do is make a reference to that particular component or the game object which you want to talk about, and then that will be it. So there are different methods of referencing inside of Unity, and I'm going to talk about just a few for beginners, which hopefully you should know how to use. But as you continue to go into game development, definitely you're going to learn more and new features which you can use for referencing or new lines of code. So I'm going to make this as short as I can, and that would be it for today's video. So we can go into Unity and learn something new today. Inside of Unity, we can start by creating a C# script. For today, this is going to be our reference script. So let's go to create C# script and let's call this reference. Let's double click this to open it up. Right, so this is it. Now pay attention to this public up here, which is a class for our reference, which is the name which we gave this class which was created. Now this public is an attribute used for accessing different classes or various classes, or you can call it a protection level for a script. You can remove this. It doesn't really matter, your class is going to work. The only problem you have is that you cannot reference it from another class, so it's best to leave this here. Now the two protection levels which you have, or access levels, are mostly public. So in this case, let's create a float. This is public float. Let's call this number, and let's set this equal to 1. And then let's make another float. The second attribute for this is going to be, for referencing, is going to be private. Let's say float. Let's call this num. Let's call this num, and let's set this equal to 2. So let's save this and take a look at it inside of Unity. And once this is done loading, create an empty game object and drag your reference script up onto it. And you can see I made two numbers. One is number and then the other was num, but only one is showing up in our inspector here. And the reason for this is because I made one public and one private. So this private is a protection level that doesn't give access to any should I say any other person who is working on the project to access this code or access it from another class. It's meant for keeping things quiet or not allowing access. while this public gives it member access. So from other classes you can make reference to this particular float called number. Same thing goes for the class up here. This can be a public class and it can also be a private class. So once you make it private, you cannot access it from anywhere else. It has to be a script which is meant strictly for your work or your code or your project in this case, which you are using to make a game inside of Unity. And another common another common attribute which you may come across a lot is the serialize field. Yep. And this has to be inside squarely brackets. So in this case, this would be serialized field, and then I can make a float, and I can call this, let's say, number 2. So let's call this number 2. Let's save this and look inside of Unity. And I guess I spelled this wrong, so this would be serialized field or serialized field with a uppercase F. So add an uppercase F to that and then save it and go back into Unity. And with this downloading, you can left click on your game object, and you can see that now there are two different floats which are accessible by us, or which gives us access, which the inspector gives us access to. So we can work with the serialized field also, and then this is not used to give access or to allow reference from a class or another script. So it's just for you to work with it inside of the inspector. You can make any change whatsoever to it the same way you do for the public value, but it stays only in the inspector. It's not accessible from other classes, and that is what the serialized field does. So with these three being covered, now we're going to move into game objects and how to actually reference them, and I'm going to use my start for that. So let me expand this. Up, and let's make it 150. Right. So I'm going to give you three ways to reference game objects inside of Unity. And the first is going to be game object dot find with tag. And then you give the name of the tag which you're looking for. So in this case, you can say player. And there will obviously be an error. Even if this loads up in the game, there will be an error because I'm not making a reference to any game object. So in this case, you can create a variable, call this var, and then let's call this var player. This would be equal to gameObject.find with tag player, and this looks much better. So you create a variable called player, and then you can find an object with the tag player, and so the game will look through these tags or all the game objects, and then it will find the specific tag which has player on it. But in this case, there are no game objects for us to play with today, so I'm just going to be speaking or talking throughout this video. So in this case, this is the tag which it's going to look for, and any game object with this tag will be stored inside of this variable. So you can use this variable and get different components inside of it, or even move it the player itself with this variable. The second one which we're going to be looking at now is going to be our get component. And then you put in the name of the component. So in this case, you can say player, and so I think this should do. But obviously, there is nothing called player inside our game. And one thing you need to know is that if you set it up to get component player, it's going to check. Alright, for example, this script reference, now we have this get component player, but we haven't stored it inside of a variable. This line of code, what it does is it checks through the object which it is attached to. In this case, it's our game object. You can see it over here. So this reference script will check through this game object and check through the components. If it sees something called player, that is what it's going to make a reference to. In this case, there is nothing called player here, but then when you start to build a game and then you add components bit by bit, a rigid body, collider, halo, or whatever it is you're adding, as many components as possible. You may even have 2 to 3 scripts on a certain game object, and if you want to make or have access to that script, definitely you have to reference it, and this line of code would come in handy for that. So that would be the third, and that would be the second way of reference which I will talk about. And third and final way of reference is find object of type. And then you put the object of type, maybe player. Now for those yeah, if you're watching this video, then maybe you've heard of it somewhere, or maybe you have not, but I'm going to explain it anyway. Find object of type, what it does is it checks through the entire game, that is this hierarchy, all the game objects which are available here, and then it finds the object called player. And so this is a very easy and lazy way to find the object which you are looking for. But then as sweet and easy as it is, it also has its own disadvantages, which as you continue to learn game development, hopefully you will get to understand that there are disadvantages to using this. But for now, since you are just starting out, find object of type, that is what it does. So it locates from game objects components from different areas, as long as they are in the scene. That would not be a problem. And so these are the 3 methods of referencing which I will talk about for the beginner level. So hopefully today you learned something. You learned a new snippet or a line of code. This is find object of type. 3 actually. So there is get component, find object of type, and then game object dot find with tag. So these are the 3 which we've learned today. And hopefully you know what public, private, and serialized fields are used for. So this should not be a problem if you are writing code and you come across these different lines. Now with that being said, we've come to the end of our video for today. So if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe. If you want to support me, I would really like that. And then share this video to those who would want to learn something from here. Thank you for watching, and hope I see you in my next video.